Welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to show you one of the most important and widely used components in all of Bootstrap, which is the navbar. So you can see actually on getbootstrap.com, they use a navbar component right here. We're also going to use one on our Yelp Camp application. And as I resize the navbar, notice how responsive it is. And then also notice, as soon as I hit tablet size and mobile size, we get this nice hamburger. So we'll be working towards all of that in this lesson. But we're going to start simpler. First thing we need to do is go to Components and go to Navbar. And before we go much further, I have created a new file just because we'll be writing quite a bit of code. The old one was getting cluttered. I'm calling it navbar.html. Inside, all I have is the link to Bootstrap. And I'll change the title here. I'll just call it Bootstrap Navbars, just like that. Now let's go to the docs and take a look at the default navbar. So this example here showcases all of the important features, where we can have a brand link, we can have other links, we can have drop-down menus, we can have a navbar form and a button, we can have things that are on the right side, things that are on the left side. This really showcases everything. It's the kitchen sink of Bootstrap navbars, and consequently the markup is a little bit long. We will be working with all of these pieces by the end of this video, but I want to start simpler. And I'll start by showing you the simplest way to make a navbar. So we need to make a nav element, and that nav element needs to have two classes. We want navbar, and we can start with dash default. We'll save, and now let's go look at the file in the browser and refresh. You can see, I hope it comes across in the screencast, there's a navbar, very faint bar going across the top. So that's that. That's how we actually initialize the navbar. Now let's fill it with some content. The first thing we'll take a look at is how we can add in this brand here, basically your company name in most cases. And that's using a navbar header, and then inside the navbar header, we use a navbar brand. So let's start by adding that div class equals navbar-header, and then inside of there we're going to add in navbar brand, which is an anchor tag. Usually when you click on that company name, it takes you back to the home page. So we'll do that here, anchor tag, and we'll start with the href equal to octothorpe so it doesn't take us anywhere. Class will equal navbar-brand, and we'll just make up a company name. Let's see, I've got a coffee cup around me, so let's go with coffee, but to actually make it a true startup, we need to change the spelling a little bit. Okay, that looks good enough for me. Coffee with a K. Let's go take a look, refresh, and we now have our navbar brand, which is a link. I click on it. It doesn't take me anywhere right now, but eventually in our applications, we'll have it so that when you click the company name, it takes you back to the home page. Next, let's see how we can add in some other links like contact, about, sign up, register, all those common links in the navbar. Let's start by adding an about page link right here. So we'll go back, and then outside of the navbar header, we're going to make another div, and this div will collect all of the content, at least on the left side of our navbar. So we have the header, and then we'll have some content, and then if we want something on the right side, we'll have another div that has another class. So the class here, it's actually two. We want nav and navbar-nav. Don't ask me about the naming there, navbar-nav. It's one of the big criticisms of Bootstrap is that it's a little bit ugly and it's not very meaningful sometimes. And there's actually a CSS framework that was created in response to the semantic meaninglessness of Bootstrap, if you will, called Semantic UI. And that's one that I really enjoy as well, and I debated teaching, but in the end, it's just not as widely used. There aren't as great tutorials yet. So back to our div here, class navbar, nav, and the class nav, both of those. And then for each item that we want on this navbar, we need to add an li, and then inside the li, if we want a link, we just add an anchor tag. So this one will just go nowhere once again, and this will be to the about page. And if I go back and refresh, we now have a link to about. Let's add one more to contact. Save, go back. Now we have two links. Now let's go ahead and add something to the right side of the page. Let's add two links. one for register or sign up, and another for login on the right side of the navbar. To do that, we need another container here. And actually, instead of using divs, it's more conventional to use an UL. It will work the exact same way, but you want to have LIs inside of a UL. Even though they'll work just fine with a div, it makes a little more sense to be inside of a UL. So we're going to add another UL, and this one is going to be nav, navbar-nav, and then navbar-right. And we need to make sure we spell that correctly, otherwise that class won't take effect. So what this will do is make us a new group of content for the right side of that navbar, and now we just need to fill it. So we'll add two links, both in LIs. The first one will go nowhere, and it will say sign up, and then we'll have another one that just says login. Let's take a look, refresh the page, and you can see we have content on the right. However, it's right up against the edge, and to fix that, we can add in a container to our navbar, just like we used a container earlier to add some spacing to our main content. We could add one inside of a navbar. So we'll put everything in the navbar inside of a container, so class equals container. And then we'll just move this down, make sure everything's indented properly. There we go. Let's test it out. Nice. So now everything is centered nice and correctly. I will show you, if I did add the container outside the nav, and I put the entire navbar inside, you'll see what happens now. If I refresh, our navbar is actually cut off, and it only goes part of the way across the screen. So container will do that to whatever we put inside of it, and in this case, we want the container inside of the navbar so that it's not constricting the actual navbar itself, but it is restricting the content inside of it. Okay, so div class container, we have our header, we have the stuff on the left, and we have some content on the right, as you can see here. Now let's step it up a little bit and go and take this basic navbar, or the default navbar that they have in the docs, and let's copy this entire thing. And I'll just put it right below our navbar. Make some space. I'll add a comment in to make it clear. Default navbar. And let's take a look at it. Refresh. So it's this navbar here. And there's a few things I want to highlight. One is that we have drop-down menus, but they don't actually work. And also, as we resize the window, we get the hamburger menu here. Those links go away, the form goes away. And to reveal them, we need to click here, but that doesn't work either. So let's begin by getting it to work, and then we'll talk about all these different pieces and what they do. To make it work, we need to go and include the BootStrap JavaScript file. So if we go back to the BootStrap docs, we click on download. There's also a JavaScript file that we need, which is right here. I'll use the CDN version, but it also comes inside the folder that you download. It's just called bootstrap.js, or the minified version, bootstrap.min.js. And let's add that, and we'll do it down at the bottom of our body, and save. And I know we haven't talked about JavaScript. You don't know what a script is and what source here does. It doesn't matter. We're just going to plug it into Bootstrap. And now I'll refresh, and we still have one small problem, which I'll show you here. It tells us that Bootstrap's JavaScript requires jQuery. Don't worry about what this is and how I got to this message, but I just wanted to show it to you so that you see the actual message we get. We need to require jQuery, which we also haven't talked about, but it's easy enough to go and get. We don't have to write any JavaScript. We don't have to know any JavaScript. We just have to include it. So all we need to do is search for jQuery CDN, which is on code.jquery.com. And down here, we need to select the most recent version and copy this URL. This is the jQuery file. And then we'll go back. And down here, we're going to add another one of these script tags, basically copying this exact code. In fact, I'll do that to make it easier. Just duplicate that exact line and change this URL to be the jQuery URL. If all else fails, you can just type this out. It's not that bad of a URL. But I got this by searching for jQuery CDN, and we'll save. And this does need to come before Bootstrap's JavaScript file because it relies on jQuery. So one more time, don't worry too much about what it is, how it works, what jQuery is. That's all coming up a few units from now. But to get the most out of Bootstrap, and in particular the navbars and the drop-down menus, we just need to have these two lines anytime we're using it. So we'll go back now and refresh. First of all, our drop-down menus now work. As you can see, we now have drop-down menus. We're not going to talk about that in this video, but as I resize and I get that hamburger, the hamburger now works. When I click on it, it toggles that hidden material. So the way that it works, right here, there's this little breakpoint right here where all of this content hides. And all that we see is the header and that button. And then when we click on the button, all that previously hidden content reappears. Let's get that to work now for us, but we're going to do a much less complicated version where we just want to hide these 4 links so that when we resize, these 4 links are hidden. And then when we click, they'll be displayed. To do that, we're going to start by taking a look at how it's accomplished in this default version, this giant monster of a navbar. And I'll just point out the important line right here. Div class collapse navbar collapse. Whatever we put inside of this div will be collapsed when we hit mobile size. So it won't make the button for us, it won't do the toggling and the reappearing and hiding, but it will hide whatever content we put inside of it when we hit that tablet and mobile size. So I'm going to copy this, and we just need to wrap it around the content we want to hide. And we want to hide this here, these 2 ULs. So the 4 links we want to hide when we hit that smaller screen size. So we'll add in the closing div tag and save. And there is a line here, and this is important, and I'll get to it in just a moment. It won't impact us just yet. But if we refresh, you'll see now when I resize, there's a point right here where all that content inside of the collapse div goes away. Now it doesn't reappear. We don't get this hamburger. We don't get a click on anything, but it has collapsed. It's gone away. And that's because we added in this line here. Div class collapse navbar collapse. The next thing we need to do is add in the hamburger. And it is quite a bit of code, unfortunately. It's still much better than if we had to do it ourselves. But the hamburger is actually all of this right here. So I'm going to copy that and paste it on up inside of the navbar header before our coffee anchor tag. And we'll save. And I'll come back to what it does. Let's just refresh. And now if I resize, I get the hamburger. There we go. Now let me explain a little bit about how it works. So there's a button, and then inside that button there's 3 spans, and each one is responsible for making one of these bars. So it's not an image that we're seeing here, it's actually HTML that's making this. Little spans that are being styled into those narrow bars to make that hamburger. And then as far as the showing and hiding of the content when we click on it, what's really important is that we have this data target attribute. And whatever this is set to, in our case, BS example navbar collapse 1, bootstrap example navbar collapse 1, let's just change it to BS nav demo, just like that. Then we need to change the ID of the content that we want to actually collapse, that we want to show and hide. So we'll change it to match BS nav demo. Notice one important difference. We're not adding in the octothorpe. So it's just like CSS. When we select something with CSS, we need to use that octothorpe to target an ID. So we leave the ID as just the text, the name BS nav demo. Here we add that octothorpe in. So we'll save, refresh. Now if I resize, we get the hamburger, and I click on it, and it works to toggle that showing and hiding. Great. The last thing that I'll show to you is that if we move something outside of this collapse, so let's take these links here, the account or the about and contact, and we just move those right here outside of the collapse div, and I refresh, you can see that they don't actually collapse, they stay there. And then I click on that, and the other 2 that are inside of the collapse are toggled. Now I'm not saying this looks good, but it does illustrate the importance of that collapse div. So whatever we put inside of collapse, whatever we have, in our case, 4 different links, 2 that are on the right, 2 that are on the left, they all will collapse whenever we hit that smaller mobile size. And then to make them show again, we click on this button here, and that button has a data target attribute, and whatever ID this corresponds to will be hidden and shown when we click on that. And that happens to be this ID here. Okay, so kind of a marathon, a lot of stuff that goes into making a Bootstrap navbar. But again, the way we got there was just by straight up copying this into our file and dissecting pieces of it. And that's how I make a navbar pretty much every time. We just take that example code and figure out what pieces we need and go from there.